Now for the information of all hands.
Welcome to episode 5 of the 1MC. Today we are talking to Lieutenant Commander Scott McBride, Chief of Media Relations, and Mr. John Ledoux, Chief of Digital Media, on social media and public affairs.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. Very excited to have Mr. Ledoux and Commander McBride here, two experts in their field. And this is kind of a growing field, you know, the opportunity to connect with folks through digital and social media is just amazing. And I think everybody in the Coast Guard is going to have to do this at some point. So I'm glad all of you that are listening today, thank you. I think this is going to be super helpful. We've got two recognized experts in their field. So the first thing I'm going to do, Mr. Ledoux, if you would talk a little bit about the Coast Guard social media platforms. I know we have like a Coast Guard Facebook account, and then I've got one, the Commandant's got one, and then how Instagram and Facebook kind of work together. How do we use social media to communicate with not just our workforce, but outside the workforce?
Absolutely. So it's a great opportunity that the Coast Guard has to leverage the social media platforms to engage with no shortage of different audiences. So currently the main platforms that the Coast Guard is using as far as an enterprise-wide solution is Facebook and Twitter, Instagram. We also have a Flickr account and then the YouTube as well. So those are primarily the accounts that we're using for the enterprise. And then as you mentioned, we're fortunate to be able to leverage those platforms for the senior leaders as well. And so really it's kind of evolved as social media has evolved, and I think you've seen this with other organizations and branches of military where it started out maybe with just Facebook and now it's expanded. So although those are the platforms we're using right now, we're continually evaluating, you know, the effectiveness of reaching the audiences, getting the messages out there, and, you know, so tomorrow it may be another platform, and it's really exciting to stay on the forefront of that and see where, you know, what best ways we can reach our audience.
That's awesome. It's a great way for us to highlight the amazing work that our Coasties do, our Team Coast Guard, and it gives families an opportunity to see their kids and their moms and dads and aunts and uncles, and it's a great way to really show off the amazing work that we do as a Coast Guard every single day. And then, you know, a lot of times that's picked up, the work we do through social media is picked up by news agencies and you know, various media platforms. Commander McBride, can you talk a little bit about what your office does with media relations?
Great. Thanks, Master Chief, for having us on the show and give us an opportunity to share a little bit about what we do and what we love. So I'm the Chief of Media for the Coast Guard, which means I'm the official spokesperson for the service. One thing I love about the job is that, you know, I get to tell the story, and my team gets to tell the story of the Coast Guard. Like you said, there's a lot of great things that our Coasties are doing out in the field, whether it's rescues or doing great things in the community that they do put on social media. That does generate into news because we don't operate in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, stuff that we do on social media can generate news in a negative way. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of great things that our service members are doing on a day basis. One of the things I'd like to talk about is be a storyteller, right? I mean, we say that every Coast Guardsman or Coast Guard Coastie is a spokesperson. So be a storyteller. You know, relate to your public by sharing something that's interesting about what you do. Mm-hmm. And I think when you do that, I think you're gonna get people really interested in our service and what you do as a member of our service. So that's just my 2 cents on kind of Coast Guard media relations and how you can get positive stories to the media.
Yeah, I tell you, there's you never know when that news crew is going to show up on the pier and want to talk to you. So you got to be ready all the time. We are in a 24-hour news cycle. It seems like news is, used to be something would happen, and you as long as you could get to it before the 6 o'clock news show, you could kind of put your own take on it. But now it's immediate, and it can go out on social media, it could go out on digital, on over the TV. So all of you listening, just remember, you never know when something big is going to happen, and you're going to have a news crew. So be prepared for that. And I think you said a very important part there, where he says you can tell what you know. So that, I know that was one of the rules we said. If you did it or you participated in it, then talk about it. But if you didn't, you should let somebody else who did talk about it.
That's right.
it's funny because a lot of times you see it's not the senior people on the news. It's a lot of times it's the petty officers that are out there, talking for the Coast Guard. So what you said was very important. Is there any resource? Is there a place that folks can go to kind of get a little bit better? Does your office have like a portal page or a link or something like that?
So anybody can go to the brand new published External Affairs Manual that was published back in May.
Okay.
And a lot of times you can find really good guidance there. The other good resource is reach out to your local public affairs office, servicing public affairs office.
At the district?
At the district level or the area level. So there's areas that have lots of units. Reach out to them if you have any questions.
Okay.
You're not in it alone, and there's a lot of experts out there that can assist you. And like you said, I mean, when it comes to public affairs philosophy, if you did it, you own it, you can talk about it. And a lot of times, my philosophy is nobody wants to hear the spokesperson. They want to hear the person that was there in the action, touching it, breathing it, experiencing it, because they tell the compelling story versus the actual spokesperson who has no maybe background in that topic. So, but again, our service members, if they got questions, reach out to your local servicing district public affairs shop or area public affairs shop or headquarters, and they can steer you in the right direction to make sure that you are in the channel and doing the right thing.
Okay, good. That's awesome. And I recommend everybody kind of take a look at the new. What was the name of the manual again?
It's the External Affairs Manual.
External Affairs Manual. Is that part of the social media handbook? Is that, Mr. Ledoux, is that included in the?
So they're actually separate.
Okay.
The External Affairs Manual is more of like the official policy guidance. The Social Media Handbook is more of like the interpretation of it and how you can apply it. So it's more like a easy to use guide on what social media means for different audiences, whether it's the Coast Guard member himself or herself, or whether it's for commands or things like that. So the Social Media Handbook has a lot of great information, but in terms of like the actual policy guidance, that's the External Affairs Manual.
Okay, so you never, like I said, you never know when that news crew is going to show up. You're going to have a real crazy case, and somebody will, the media will find out about it and show up, and you want to be prepared for that. So take a look at that. Mr. Ledoux, can you talk a little bit about the social media handbook and what's in that to help our folks, use social media the correct way?
Absolutely. So we're really excited about this one, this version of the social media handbook. It's been about 6 years since the last one, so a lot has changed in the social media environment and just the online landscape in general. The good thing about this handbook is that it really addresses each audience as we see it in terms of social media policy or just relation to for Team Coast Guard. So if you're just an individual Coast Guard member, who wants to know how to use social media or what the guidelines might be, or even just questions on social media platforms in general, we have answers for that in this handbook. If you are a CO or a leader, enlisted leader who would like to have information on how best to prepare service members for responsible use and to stay out of trouble and things like that, we have a section for that. And then we even expand into the territory of how does the official social media policy for the Coast Guard affect retirees and auxiliaries and family members. So regardless of what audience you are with underneath the Team Coast Guard, this handbook kind of addresses the guidelines, recommendations, as well as just ways to effectively use each platform. So back in the end of last year, we put out an All Coast that kind of updated the social media policy in general. And what that really did is clearly define and reinforce the different uses for online and social media activity. And I'm talking about unofficial, official, and then personal use. So those are the three, capacities in which, whether you're a service member or a civilian, in which you can use social media, and understanding the nuances between those three and how best, to prepare yourself to use each one of them differently is probably the greatest tool in the handbook. And so a lot of great resources for every audience out there.
That's neat. So, can you talk a little bit about the different platforms, between, and I'm not good at this, but, you've got Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook, and I know there's some others out there. I don't know if TikTok is, I don't know where they stand right now, but if you could talk a little bit about who can use what and why, I get this question a lot. Hey, I'm stationed, so and so, and I'd like to have my own Instagram account, and we don't right now. There's a process for that, but we're not really like. Can you talk about the amount of work that goes in and why we would allow some units to have certain platforms and other units not?
Absolutely. So there's many reasons why the platforms, I guess, I won't say authorized, but the intended use of a platform at what hierarchy you are in the Coast Guard organization exists. And that's kind of evolved since social media really kind of took off for the Coast Guard about the 2008 to 2012 timeframe. So currently, obviously I mentioned the enterprise accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Flickr, and YouTube. So that's what we use at the enterprise accounts. And then you break it down to the areas and the districts, and the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter authorized for those levels. And then at the unit level, we're really talking about just the Facebook platform. So the reason for that is there's a lot that goes into managing an account. And down to the district level, we have public affairs assets, trained communicators, trained by the Department of Defense and Homeland Security on how to manage a platform, how to engage with the publics, and basically just keep it, legit and on the up and up. Below the district level, you really are talking about an additional duty or collateral duty representative who is now taking on that official capacity as a official communicator on behalf of the Coast Guard. So managing that is a lot of responsibility on top of one's own, additional duty, or I should say regular duties that they endure. So making sure that we don't abandon platforms or we don't spread ourselves too thin, down at the unit level, that's really where you get into trouble where, people are looking at that account now as an official communication platform. So you might get messages on the inbox from potential recruits. You might get derogatory posts or comments on, some of the threads that you've made on that platform. And if you're not monitoring those, then it really can disparage the Coast Guard brand and all the reputable information that's there. So those are some of the things we balance when we look at what those levels are. Now, if someone is at a unit and they think, we really need a platform that's outside of our intended use policy, then we do have a waiver process to go through, and we review each and every one of those and basically determine, what's your goals, what's your objectives, who's your target audience, is this platform right for those audiences and goals. And if all that makes sense still at the end of the day, then, we'll go ahead and approve it. But that's kind of where we stand now with the different platforms.
That's great, Commander.
Yeah, what I was going to add, I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Ledoux. I think understand what your communications objective is. A lot of times we get so excited about some fancy new tool or communications tactic that we can use because we see other organizations utilizing it or using it. So I think understanding what your communications objective is and then how that's going to support the Commandant's strategic priorities. So sometimes you see a TikTok video or you see a Snapchat or an Instagram, you're like, I want that, and the question is why? Like, why do you need that? And how is that going to support your communications objective? And I think if you ask yourself that question and answer that, then that will help determine, then after talking to the district public affairs shop or headquarters, maybe we don't need this tool, or yes, we actually do need this tool because this is how it's going to support our priorities.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's just for it's unit morale. So somebody says, hey, we want to put pictures up of the great stuff that we're doing, or we want to, but it's more, but a lot of these platforms are more than that. You have to, like you said, you have to monitor it, watch what people are saying, and then if people are asking you questions, you don't want to just ignore it. So I go to a unit and they say, we just want a Instagram count for our morale, just to show off the stuff that we're doing. And if it's going to be an official unit, then there's a lot of rules and a lot of hoops that people have to jump through for that. And then you said there's some unofficial pages out there. What are some things that we should be careful for when we are engaging the unofficial pages? I know Coast Guard memes do a great job of poking fun and having a little adding humor to what we do as an organization in terms of some of the monotony of the jobs and some of the kind of stuff that maybe that you can find humor in, but there's a lot of other unofficial pages out there. But as a Coastie, we have to be careful sometimes because just because it's not an official page doesn't mean that we don't still have some responsibilities in how to act. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the biggest and most important thing to remember is that it doesn't matter if you are engaging with a closed group, an open group, or something that says Coast Guard and then as part of the title. Regardless of what that communication is, it's public. And so you have to think about it in those terms. And if you do that, then I think you're on the right approach to engaging safely and responsibly on social media. So regardless of what the affiliation of the group or page might be, just remembering that it's public is the best thing you can do, because you don't want to put something out there that is going to put yourself, your unit, or the Coast Guard in general in a bad light. And the reason why is because when you do that, you're putting a lot of things in jeopardy. So every time you potentially bring discredit upon the Coast Guard, you're actually hurting yourself, you're hurting the overall intention and the mission of the Coast Guard, because somebody might see a negative comment, and so then that hurts recruiting, or it might hurt funding, or legislators might see it, or just the overall public opinion and support in general. So there's a lot of ways that you could feel comfortable engaging with one of those sites, but the most important thing you can do right off the bat is remember that it is public. So if you wouldn't say it in front of your grandmother, you wouldn't say it in front of your CO, in front of legal, or anyone else for that matter. If it doesn't check all those boxes, then you really shouldn't be posting it on the internet.
One thing I'd like to add is that it kind of goes back to the if you did it, you own it, you can talk about it, as long as you're within SAP, security, accuracy, policy, and propriety. I think the American public has gotten maybe complacent or comfortable with, you get a source of information and that becomes gospel. So I don't have the full picture. I only have 10% of the story. And then you share that on said platform. And then next thing you know, the crowd starts backing it. And then it's all false information, or maybe it's not 100% accurate. So I think if our service members remember, stay in your lane. If you did, you own it, you can talk about it. I remember a situation involving a social media account when I was an area PO, and there was an investigation going on involving one of our cutters. There's a collision in the Panama Canal, and that image that I saw and only a handful of people saw got leaked to a social media platform. And they didn't know that was an actual current image. They thought it was an old image. And I reached out to them, and they were very professional about it, like, hey, we didn't know about this, sorry. But again, that's an example of people don't have the complete picture. And sometimes they may be sharing something, and then because sometimes they don't want to do the research, they post it on there, and then it just starts spreading.
Yeah, I know that within the department there was a component of within DHS that had what the folks thought was a closed page. But there is no real such thing as a closed page, because anybody can take a screenshot of something and then take it somewhere else. So there's nothing that gets posted on social media that actually can stay completely private. The component leadership and even DHS had to go to Capitol Hill to testify about the things that were said on this supposedly private page. And that's very uncomfortable for component leaders to try to go answer questions for something that happened on a page that they didn't maybe even know about. And I guarantee you they didn't know about it, because if they did, they probably would have stopped it, done something about it. So I do think that we have to be careful, very careful. And it's forever, right? I mean, it's digital. So, if sometimes people tell me, hey, I want to be you one day, or I want to be the MCPOC, or I want to, go to OCS one day, or if you say something because you feel a certain way right now, then next year you might feel completely different. Something might happen, or maybe you were posting something and you didn't have all the information. Somebody calls you, educates you, and then you say, wish I hadn't posted that. But it can be forever. So definitely cannot overstate. And I'll pitch it back to you, Mr. Ledoux. I definitely can't overstate just being careful about it. People used to say, hey, if you're going to write an email that might cause some issues, sleep on it. Type it up, put it in your drafts, sleep on it. If you come in the next day and you feel exactly the same way, then you maybe can hit send. But oftentimes in social media we just don't do that. Mr. Ledoux, any other thoughts?
Yeah, just a couple follow-on thoughts there as we talk through this. And I think, when it comes to the unofficial accounts, it's very tricky. And you mentioned, the other organization under DHS that had to testify. So I believe I know which incident you're referring to, and in that case, there were several leadership type position people in that organization that had liked a group or a page, and just that in and of itself almost condoned in a way, being a member of that group as these things are posted almost condoned in a way that activity or those messages. And it makes me think of an axiom that I've learned coming up through my career, is that the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. So there's multiple different platforms, pages, groups out there. Just be careful of which ones you follow, because that shows if there are negative items or disparaging remarks on there. Just your followership and activity and engagement with those sites could alienate you from lower members in your workforce. And then secondly, you mentioned, once it's out there, it's out there. You can take screenshots, and that's absolutely true. So I think so many times there's not thought, or before you hit the button to post or tweet or whatever it is, and in that case, you can't get it back. Like you mentioned, there's a book that I can think of named Groundswell, and in it says that you can't hide something off the internet. That's like trying to get pee out of a pool. And that's kind of a graphic illustration, but if you think about it that way, once it's out there, it's gone. There's no more containing it. And so it's really, really crucial that before you, either whether it's engaging with one of these sites or before you put something out there, like I mentioned, that you wouldn't say in front of your family or your CO, just think through it. And as you mentioned, come back to it if you have to.
Yeah.
Talking about the current state of media. Going through journalism school, they talked about it's about the bottom line. How can we get people to support our media organization? And I work with a lot of reputable media sources, but unfortunately, there are some journalists that maybe they're going to be first to print without getting the full story. Just like what we were talking about earlier, it's not uncommon on the public side, and unfortunately, they take a snapshot of an image that they saw on a social media page, and then now it's out in the court of public opinion to let them decide. I remember they used to say that media was designed not to tell people how to think, but what to think about. But now you're starting to see a media where they're telling you how to think, and somebody puts something out there, and good or bad, the court of public opinion is now making a judgment on person X, which is really can be unfair. So I think, again, going back to Mr. Ledoux's point, being smart about what you post.
I like what you said there. What to think about. I tell you, social media is an influencer. We have some folks that are very creative. They're funny, and they really are brilliant at what they do, and they influence. They serve as an influence. And that influence can go for good and humor, and we can laugh and have a good time about it. But it also can go for bad and then have, really hurt the cause that we're trying to support. We are trying to create a very inclusive Coast Guard, the most inclusive Coast Guard that we possibly can. And we really care about respect and making sure that everybody feels valued. And when so as you get out there and you see these influencers, we definitely want to reinforce the influence for good and the ability to communicate with the workforce what we're trying to accomplish, and that's I love to see funny stuff that does good.
I think sometimes people think they're doing good for the service. But unfortunately, it ends up hurting the service. And we saw that during the shutdown. People were leaking documents to the press, and then the press is calling me, asking me for a comment. So now we're on our heels, and we're unaware of what's going on, and we're scrambling to come up with a response. When in true goodness, the person was trying to do this out of the goodness of their heart. They're like, hey, this is a good idea. But somebody saw it, and they said, this is not helpful. Sends it to the press, and now we're answering for it. So I think, Coast Guard's, Coasties should pause, ask the question, how is this going to be helpful to the organization? And it is good. I mean, there needs to be constructive comments and criticism, but use your chain of command and have that dialogue. But don't go right to the media and be like, I have a problem, and here we go. And we saw that during the shutdown, which was a very challenging political environment, as you're aware of.
Oh yeah, I know, and it was I agree with you. Sometimes people are doing it because they're trying to force a conversation, or they're trying to, they think they're doing good, but it might force a conversation, but maybe it's not an informed conversation, or it makes us have to, if I have this whole thing, if you're explaining, you're losing. And we'd like to be out in front with a message, and I think everybody's trying to do the right thing. So I agree with you. Mr. Ledoux, there's a documentary out there that I found fascinating. It was called The Social Dilemma. Anybody listening can see that. That is really interesting. It's not very long, but it is powerful. And it talked about, as you use digital platforms, as you use social media, the algorithms within these platforms drive advertising to you. They also drive kind of comments, and you start to live in an echo chamber where you're just hearing kind of what you want to hear all the time. Have you seen that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've seen it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But I think that's the other thing too. When you have to remember that as you use social media, it's a very controlled environment. The platforms, the social media platforms, tailor the content to what they think you want to hear. So that. I think we need to sometimes just take a pause and say, am I getting the full picture here?
Yeah, I remember watching that documentary, and in journalism school they talk about confirmation bias. And whenever I tell my friends when they're kind of critiquing media, I say, look at the full spectrum of media. Don't just watch, Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or Washington Post. Look at the full spectrum and see what they're saying. Because somewhere in the middle is the truth, is the accurate picture. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening with, like in The Social Dilemma, it was a thing that started off as a good thing, right? They wanted to tailor to the individual customers' likes and dislikes. And I remember thinking I mentioned something about DNA testing, and then the next thing, like all the Facebook things say DNA testing on my thing, so the machines are listening. And what happens is it tailors the media to us.
Right.
So whatever my interests are. And then that's where you confirm the bias. And then, you start saying, well, the media that I see says this, and this is what I believe in, therefore I'm right. And then that breaks down any constructive dialogue with a differing opinion.
Right.
And I think we just need to be very careful with what we watch.
Yeah.
I can add to that too. It certainly is an interesting documentary, just from a personal perspective, and a lot of it is if I recall correctly, focused on the commerce side of it. How your spending habits, your browsing history, all those things kind of tie into how we can get commerce in front of you. But that actually gives a great illustration of how you create a digital footprint with everything you do. And so, too, is your involvement as a member of Team Coast Guard. Everything you do paints a picture of, like you mentioned earlier, you post something now and perhaps next year you feel differently. And so you got to be so careful, regardless of what platforms you use or what age you are or how long you've been in or what rate, you have to be so careful of the digital footprint, because it's not just a digital footprint you're creating when you engage online. It's actually like a digital trail of history. And so people, and I mean, we've seen that out in the press where people did things when they were younger or in their teens, and now they're, being scrutinized over it decades later sometimes.
Right. So as we, determine that, as you look at something, you start seeing more and more of it. I'm wondering if there's not some way that we can leverage social media to help our recruiting. I wish the recruiting budget was a lot bigger than it is. It's not, but perhaps there's ways that we can leverage our social media platforms to help recruiting command.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And I mean, the Coast Guard recruiters do a great job, but it's a difficult job that they're going against. I mean, they're competing against universities, other branches, life situations. And I mean, they run the Go Coast Guard page and their own social media accounts, and yet we're still finding ourselves competing with that. So the good thing is, and as Lieutenant Commander McBride mentioned earlier, is that every Coast Guard member is a spokesperson. And so Coast Guard personnel are often, in the best position to share the Coast Guard story. And we encourage them to do so, because sharing that story and giving, each person has the story, unique to themselves, but sharing that story and giving those messages, those stories wings, traction to reach outside of just your own personal bubble. that does so much to just tell the Coast Guard story and reach people that wouldn't normally be, reached by recruiters or may not have yet, as well as just kind of expand the public trust and understanding of what the Coast Guard does. And those items in and of themselves, are almost beyond what a Coast Guard recruiting budget could be.
Yeah, what I was going to say, there are not enough public affairs specialists in the Coast Guard to tell the Coast Guard story, as you know. And I think what Mr. Ledoux is saying is, it's about relationships, right? When you meet somebody, sometimes I find when you listen, they'll share information, and then you find, how can you relate to this person? And a lot of times the Coasties that go for those Memorial Day events or those Veterans Day events, that's a free shot on goal. That's your opportunity to share the story. Whenever I go to the elementary schools, I talk about what does Veterans Day mean to me. Kids don't know what it means to be a public affairs specialist, but they know Alexander Hamilton because they've heard the musical.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I relate. I'm like, did you know that we have the coolest founding father of any services, and it's Alexander Hamilton? You might have heard of him because he's got a Broadway musical.
Right.
And they're like, oh, then everyone gets excited. And then now you've got them kind of intrigued.
Sure.
So I think from a very informal way, our service members can, tell a story. As what do you do in the service? Tell a compelling story. I did this, and I worked with this team, and it was amazing. We helped people, and people relate to storytelling, and I think that's good. One of my favorite, when in a more formal setting, is when the Alto Subarco story, the counter narcotics bust. Well, here's a story where we had compelling imagery, and it showed a Coast Guard mission that was amazing. And then, this makes the national news. It makes all the late night talk shows. And then you got people who are like, I wanted to be a Marine, but I didn't know Coast Guard did this really cool tactical stuff.
Right.
So that was kind of a huge win where you got to tell this cool story. And people were like, I had no idea the Coast Guard does this.
So that leads me. So we talked about official, unofficial, and personal. So folks can leverage their personal social media accounts to also help highlight the Coast Guard. What about video? I go to some places, I was out in D13 for a few years, and the surfmen do a great job of like putting GoPros on their helmets and things like that. Is there things that the units can do or folks can do to help capture imagery for you or to help the media relations folks here at headquarters?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we like to say if you don't have imagery of it, it didn't happen. And, that's imagery is part of the storytelling. They say a picture tells 1,000 words. A lot of times you can talk about what we do in the Coast Guard, but if the person can't relate because they don't know, they can't visualize what's actually happening. But when they see that surfman go over the bar and they see like the waves crashing and the exhilarating, they see all of that. That's how they relate. And getting that imagery, collecting that imagery, number one, because anybody can collect it. You can, iPhones are amazing these days, or Samsung Galaxies or whatever.
Right.
Collect that imagery, and then you don't have to process it. Send it to your local district, servicing public affairs shop, and let them put that out on Divids. And then Divids is how it gets out to the media.
So Divids, that's DVIDS.
DividsHub.net.
DividsHub.net. And I tell you, I apologize to all the storekeepers out there if you get a run on requests for GoPros. But anyway, it is a great way to tell a story. And if we want to get something on the news, you kind of have to have imagery. You kind of have to have
That's right.
some sort of video or something that they can show. That's a great way that units can help. It's unlikely that they would need an individual unit would need like an Instagram or anything other than Facebook, but you definitely can capture imagery and send that in, and then we can put that on the Coast Guard's social media, and then you'll get not just your unit, you'll get the whole Coast Guard looking at it and everybody that follows the Coast Guard.
That's right. I don't know if you recall from Hurricane Florence, there was a great video of a rescue swimmer going down to this pickup truck. It was a road that looked like a river because of the storm and the flooding. And he had a GoPro on his head. And we've worked very hard with CG 711 to make sure that waiver has been approved, which it has for hurricane season. Because, for somebody who doesn't know what a rescue swimmer does in a hurricane, in urban SAR, seeing that first-person account from that GoPro, you feel like you're there. You feel like you are doing the rescue. So I think, like you said, Master Chief, imagery is compelling. It helps tell the story, and it helps the public visualize what we're actually doing.
Yeah.
What's great, going back to the divots, what's great about that, and as you mentioned, you get that footage, you send it up to your district or higher level public affairs entity, and they get it on divots. That's not just like snapshot in time. Divots is basically set up to automatically forward everything to the National Archives. So you might just be, working on a cutter, you're not even public affairs, and yet that information, that medium, that visual medium that you've collected, you send up through public affairs, and it's made into the National Archives. You tag it right, you caption it, and you never know. That might come up 100 years from now when they're telling the Coast Guard story from back when. So it's really a cool opportunity to do that.
That's neat. Is there any danger of posting your own videos? If you're at a unit and you have a Facebook page and is that pretty safe?
I think as long as you stay within security, accuracy, policy, and propriety, follow that guideline. If you don't know, talk to your servicing public affairs
Okay.
shop. One thing I want to harp on divots is they don't want polished products. They just want raw video. And the reason why is that news segment at night is going to show that 30-second clip of raw video, no music attached. They just want the video, and then they can use it. If say you've got a person in the field that produces this thing, media can't use it. So we always say, just capture the raw imagery, the raw video, and then that can get sent to media. And like Mr. Ledoux said, it is a historical archive. So you're telling the Coast Guard history. We saw the Commander Smith footage on NBC this past weekend, and that's because people took photos.
Yeah.
And they were able to tell that story.
That's neat. So me editing it, sending it to music, and you don't need that.
We don't need that.
But
We just want
I
the
feel
raw
so
video.
accomplished when I can do that. Anyway, so that's good. That's good. Well, hey, there is such an amazing power for good, and for humor, and just to improve morale. A young person just joined the Coast Guard. They're out on their first SAR case, and they get some pictures, and we get to put that up on social media, on Facebook, and then all their family get to see. When I remember when I joined, we didn't have any of this, and my family never saw me do anything, until way later in my career. So I want to compliment all the entire. So for those of you listening, Commander McBride and Mr. Ledoux work for CG 092. So that means that's our government and public affairs office, and they do an absolutely amazing job. This is where my CG comes from. This is run out of this office, and all the communications tools, and when the Commandant and I go to Capitol Hill, I'll tell you, I was very sad though. The Commandant and I went to Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago, and we heard from several Coast Guard members, boy, the Coast Guard is a really well-kept secret. And I was like, no, we don't want to be a really well-kept secret. We want to. So we need to continue to just keep working. We need everybody's help out there, telling the good work of the Coast Guard, and telling some positive stories to help showcase the Coast Guard story. Mr. Ledoux, I'd like to get you to share some advice and maybe some good ideas, and kind of tell folks that everything you'd want they should know about how to use social media properly, and tell the Coast Guard story as we wrap up here today.
Sure. Yeah. So everything you mentioned is completely true in terms of share your story, get it out there. And if you're not comfortable creating your own content, then there's still ways that you can advocate for the Coast Guard and share that message. You can just go to any one of the senior leadership pages, the MCPOG page, for example, and just engage there. So you don't have to post your own thing. You can just comment on another story that might be within your lane of experience, and you can do it that way. Another thing you can do is just share content. So if there's something that you see on one of the enterprise accounts or the senior leader accounts that you're proud of, go ahead and share that and help that message gain traction. What I think is interesting is that on Facebook, I think as of this morning, we were at 825,000 followers, Twitter 563,000, and Instagram 673,000. So if you think about the numbers of just Team Coast Guard, active duty, reserve, civilians, and family members, well, these numbers of our audience pages are well beyond that. So you're not engaging with just Coast Guard members. You are engaging with members of the media, the outside public, delegates, elected delegates, So just engaging with our platforms is one easy way to help tell the Coast Guard story. And I think just in terms of that, or in addition to that, I should say, if you are engaging and creating your own content, just stay within the lanes. You know, Lieutenant Commander McBride mentioned security, accuracy, propriety, and policy. So that's something to think about. I had the opportunity to do a training on social media for senior leader spouses of the Coast Guard recently. And, you know, we had all the normal bullets that you can find in our doctrine and in the handbook and things like that. And I said, I know you've really heard this stuff before. So what I really want to get through to you is two things. One, perception. Just think about what you're posting, how it can be perceived, not just for you and your friends who might think a joke is funny or, you know, something, but think about the different audiences of where this is going to be and how is that going to be perceived. So if you can think about that, and then the second thing is just complacency. So as you're engaging with the enterprise accounts or creating your own social media content, just don't get complacent because you know what the rules are. Just don't get too comfortable because it's not like an egregious intentional thing when we see people kind of, you know, run into the wrong lane. It's just where they maybe didn't perceive how their content might be looked at, and they got a little bit complacent. So those are the two main things I would say. You know, go out there, tell your story, but just make sure you consider the perception and don't get complacent.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. You know, I have a saying that I tell people. People think that the MCPOG is a 5'9" bald-headed guy. And it's no, the MCPOG is really a 5'4" brown-haired woman because she does. Chief Crystalline Neen does. You know, all my communications, and you know, she does such a wonderful job of highlighting leadership and highlighting all the amazing work that we're doing. And she has a remarkable ability to recognize our folks, especially during affinity months and special recognition opportunities. You know, she leverages our Master Chief Peters of the Coast Guard social media accounts to do really great work. And I know I get sometimes a letter from a parent or something that says, hey, thank you for highlighting my child's great work in the Coast Guard. And, you know, I always, yes, of course I did. You know, it's wonderful, but it's really Chief Neen. So I want to publicly use this opportunity to thank Chief Neen. And Commander McBride, any more closing thoughts about media relations?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is, you know, do you have a Coast Guard elevator pitch? You know, that 30-second elevator pitch.
Good.
Because, you know, you just never know who you're going to run into on the street that may be an influencer. And you may be the only person that person interacts with that knows anything about the Coast Guard. And they may be that person. I love the story about the Coastie that was in Iceland.
Yes.
That just being a kind person,
Yes.
you know, and loving their neighbor, and bought a meal for somebody who happens to be the senior person in the country.
Right.
So I think if Coasties do Coastie things, and we've got that elevator speech, because we're all proud to be in the service.
Right.
You know, just show that joy, show that pride, and you never know, that person may be the person that, you know, is an influencer and helps get that story out to the world.
That's right. That's right. You never know. And I'll tell you, that's the beauty of the Coast Guard, is people are doing fantastic things at all levels of the organization. And being able to have that, you know, what do you do in the Coast Guard, that's a great thing to have in your back pocket just in case somebody comes up and asks you about it. You never know. You absolutely never know. Yes, sir.
I think just if I could just throw a couple things here on at the end to address all of that, regardless of whether you're public affairs or not, or if you're engaging with the media or social media, there is a platform, a training platform out there that people can go to, and it's called DINFOS Pavilion. DINFOS is the Defense Information School, and it is the joint component school where all professional communicators of the military go to, including the Coast Guard. And so you go to this DINFOS Pavilion, and it has tips on how to engage with the media, how to build a social media plan, how to stay safe on social media, the difference between misinformation and disinformation, all those kind of topics. So that's a great training resource. And that leads me into the second one, which is specific to the Coast Guard. We do have the uscg.mil/social media, where you can find other, I guess, relevant or Coast Guard specific policies, such as the External Affairs Manual we talked about, which is Commandant Instruction M5700.13A, so as well as the Social Media Handbook. So whether you're, you know, savvy with social media or engaging with the media, or whether you're just interested in it or you just want to stay safe, there's so many resources out there. So definitely encourage everyone to promote the Coast Guard story. And if you have questions, go check out those training resources.
And if you don't know, ask. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times, you know, public affairs specialists can come up with great ideas, but the individual Coastie, they're very creative.
Right.
And they may have ideas that maybe the public affairs staff hasn't thought about. So ask.
There's a lot of creativity out there, I'll tell you. But hey, both of you, thank you very much for all your hard work. Getting people, making people aware of the Coast Guard is key to recruiting. It's key to helping us get a better budget. It's key to helping us get the tools and what we need to do our mission. And the way, I think you all do so much to help tell the Coast Guard's positive story and all the great work we do. Thank you both very much for all the hard work, and you both are very creative in your own right.
Master Chief, right back at you. To be honest,
you.
there's so many senior leaders that are still afraid to engage in this medium, and here you are with this podcast, the 1MC, which has been great, and we're already seeing the analytics going up. So that means people are looking to you for guidance and topics on workforce related issues.
Yeah.
So kudos to you for
Thank you.
for your active social media presence. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I'm going to try to get. We've got this tech revolution coming, and I think social media and our use of social media platforms and media relations is a part of that tech revolution. So we might talk about some of the cool technology improvements that we're making in the Coast Guard upcoming. But thank you both very much.
Thank you.